I'm Michael Pauley, and this is Faith in Politics. On this broadcast, we range from the soul to the state as we cultivate those virtues and explore those principles that help us live well as faithful Catholics in this great land. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is Friday, June 24th, the Solemnity of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, and usually we release these podcasts on a Tuesday, but today is a special one for reasons that may be obvious to many listeners, and that we had a earthquake of a decision coming out this morning from the Supreme Court in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. As many of you know, this is the case that concerns the pro-life law passed in the state of Mississippi, which many observers thought provided the Supreme Court a good opportunity to revisit its decisions in Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And that indeed is what has happened. The court has used this opportunity to overturn those precedents. And this is, at the risk of stating the obvious, huge news. So I'm very glad that we'll be joined today by Chris Motz, who is in Sioux Falls. I'm broadcasting from Rapid City. The decision, including the majority opinion and the dissent and some of the concurring opinions, I believe, weighs in excess of 200 pages. So I'd love to tell you that Chris and I have read through every word of it. We have not, but we have read enough to know the general impact of what has happened this morning. So, Chris, maybe just at the outset, you could just walk through some of the highlights of what this decision says.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Just from the outset, it's largely like we expected it to be. Of course, what was it? Back in May, we saw this leaked draft of the Alito majority is what we saw at that point in time. And at that point in time, we didn't exactly know where the other justices were going to be. But when it was leaked that I think there were 5 votes with him. So we were still unsure. I mean, I think everybody predicted that the 3 dissenting votes would be the dissenting votes. What we didn't know at that point in time was whether, in fact, this would end up remaining the majority decision. Of course, it's not over until it's over, until it's published from the bench, which they did this morning. But perhaps the biggest question in everybody's mind was going to be, where's the Chief Justice going to fall? So as we saw the decision as it was published this morning, first note that it's 213 pages long with the majority, with the Chief's concurring opinion, and then with the dissents. And so as kind of was expected by many, the 5 justices that signed on to the majority that was written by Alito included, so it was Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett. Those were the 5 that signed on. And then there were a couple of those that also wrote their own concurrences. And I'm looking here now. I believe it is, I know Thomas wrote one, and that's one I have had a swamped day. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but I really want to read Thomas's to see what he has to say. Many are expecting that just in terms of the jurisprudence and setting the stage for what future jurisprudence looks like, not only is Alito's what Alito has written important, but whatever Thomas has to say will also be important. And then there's one other concurrence too that I don't quite have at the tip of my tongue.
Justice Kavanaugh. Justice Kavanaugh wrote one. Yep.
Thank you. So those they were in the majority, but they justices are also entitled to write a concurring opinion, which those 2 did. Next, we've got the Chief Justice Roberts, who concurred in judgment. It means, okay, I mean, I'm agreeing with the conclusion that you've reached here, but I've got some different rationale that I want to unpack. So that's what he did. He says, in his own words, that he would have reached a so-called more measured judgment. He wouldn't have gone as far as they did, but he did agree. So the question that they granted certiorari on was, can we actually restrict abortion pre-viability? And he agreed with the court. No, viability is a standard that doesn't make sense. It has never made sense.
Yeah.
And so it's not. It's actually not protected. So it's really important, actually, that he's concurred in the judgment. So what this means is that for the future, if there are future attacks against this particular decision, it means that we now have essentially a 6-3 decision, even though he didn't join the majority. He's joined him in judgment. But it would mean that in the event of future appointments to the bench by the current president, in the event of other resignations or deaths, or any future presidents, it just means that there's that little extra buffer, actually. Because you look at 5-4 majority, it's really you're razor thin with only just one justice. 6-3 gives you a little more of a cushion. So it's seen as just having a greater presidential staying power, if you will, with the Chief Justice writing that concurrence. And then, of course, the three in dissent, not unexpected, Sotomayor, Kagan, and help me out, Breyer, is still sitting on the bench. So that's that's the overview. And if you look at the syllabus, so the way they tee it up is they kind of write this just encapsulated summary right at the beginning of the decision, and that's what all of us did this morning. I mean, the real con law scholars and pros, they obviously went and read the whole decision immediately. Those of us that have other things to do in our day, I haven't gotten to it yet, but we all went and read the syllabus. And here's what it says, first page of the syllabus, and this is the money line. The Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elected representatives. So what it has done is it has returned us to the state of affairs that existed prior to January of 1973, meaning the states have the authority to regulate abortion. Now, one of the reasons it's important that it's so explicit when it says Roe and Casey are overruled, for a state like South Dakota, we've got what they call a trigger law on the books, and that trigger law, it dates back to 2005. It says, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it right here in front of me, but from memory, paraphrasing, it says, when the Supreme Court provides that the states shall have the right to regulate abortion. Essentially, when the Supreme Court overrules Roe versus Wade, our trigger law kicks into effect and makes it criminalizes abortion. That's really important, what the decision says here, that it's so explicit, because you could have imagined, and some of us were fearing, a decision that was not explicit.
Yes.
Is maybe articulating a new standard that's not exactly viability, or maybe it's upholding the Mississippi law but not directly overturning Roe. It maybe permits some restrictions but not all. It didn't do that. Thanks be to God.
Yeah, my biggest fear going into this, Chris, was that we would not even have a clear majority opinion, but some kind of a plurality type ruling where you don't actually have an unambiguous result coming out of it, and that was not the case. And thanks be to God for that. So, so you mentioned the trigger law, and I just wanted to use this opportunity to point out the Governor Kristi Noem, issued a press release today. That I'll just read the first line. It says, today, in response to the United States Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, Governor Kristi Noem and leaders in the South Dakota legislature jointly announced plans for a special session later this year to save lives and help mothers impacted by the decision. And then the release goes on a bit later to point out, as you said, Chris, South Dakota's trigger law, found in South Dakota Code of Law 2217.5.1, provides that as of today, all abortions are illegal in South Dakota, quote, unless there is appropriate and reasonable medical judgment that performance of an abortion is necessary to preserve the life of the pregnant female, close quote. So, so that is just something that we can just be so thankful for that we are blessed to live in a state where the legislature passed this. I want to say back in 2005, if memory serves, but don't quote me on that. And so as of today, it is not legal to do an elective abortion in the state of South Dakota. And that is just an amazing achievement, and so grateful for that. Um, so just kind of thinking ahead, so the governor and the legislative leaders have agreed to a special session. But what if people say, well, we have a trigger law. Why do we even need to go into special session? What would be the point of that? So any thoughts, reflections on that, Chris?
Yeah, there are a number of things that I think would be important during a special session. One of the things that we need to make sure that we're doing is that there aren't any loopholes. Let's actually take a good hard look at our language to make sure that it is appropriately criminalizing what ought to be criminalized. We also may want to take a look at things like advertising, that we're not going to be out of state advertising for abortions. Because one of the things that's really important to remember is that Roe versus Wade doesn't make abortion illegal everywhere. And, I think this kind of gets lost in the weeds maybe with where we think, oh, Roe's gone, great, abortion's illegal. No, it's returned it to the states. So there's going to be a hodgepodge of different states doing different things. One of the things that we've already heard about, including from some companies that have a presence in South Dakota, is that they're going to be paying for their employees to travel to access abortion, which is really, just what a sad thing to financially facilitate the pitting of mothers against their children. So that's, we obviously want to prevent that. We don't want that to happen in South Dakota to South Dakota mothers, to South Dakota children. But even if we're just like thinking through, how do we care for women and children? How are we caring for families, moms and dads that are in difficult situations? How do we actually enact a pro-family policy that is, thinking in new and creative ways about how we really craft a pro-life culture? It's not just about eliminating abortion, which is fundamentally that's got to happen, right? It's a both and. So I guess to summarize, we can strengthen our trigger to make sure it really is doing what we need it to do without out any loopholes. We can ensure equal protection of all of our laws for every single human being, including those in the womb. Take a look at telemedicine, make sure that that's not going to be creeping into our state without our knowledge and without due safeguards in the law. Advertising, ensuring corporations aren't funding abortions and promoting travel out of state. And then, something the legislature does from time to time, which is just really, it uses its voice, not necessarily in a lawmaking way, but really in a way that expresses the will of the people that it represents. I think another thing that the legislature could do in a special session is some sort of resolution that's calling on the National Congress to actually act in a way that is protecting all life from the moment of conception and supporting families who need it. So I think those are all a variety of things that we might see.
Yeah. And it seems like we need a whole paradigm shift. And I think about how much government money over the last few decades has flowed to Planned Parenthood for the express purpose of destroying unborn life. And I find myself asking, why couldn't we see multiple states going in the opposite direction where they're actually approving, say, I'm just shooting from the hip here, but a block grant program for the purpose of benefiting pro-life pregnancy resource centers? Why not? After all the subsidies that we have given to the culture of death, why not actually use some of that money to subsidize life instead? So, Chris, there's an interesting. There's so many fascinating quotes in this majority opinion, but I wanted to give your thoughts on just one of them. And it has to do that. This is actually found on page 68 of the majority opinion. And it's just a brief kind of reflection where Justice Alito writes about the failure of these previous precedents of Roe and Casey to actually do what they promised they would do at the time, which is settle the national debate over abortion. So this is what Justice Alito writes on that, referring to Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. He says, neither decision has ended debate over the issue of a constitutional right to obtain an abortion. Indeed, in this case, 26 states expressly ask us to overrule Roe and Casey and to return the issue of abortion to the people and their elected representatives. This court's inability to end debate on the issue should not have been surprising. This court cannot bring about the permanent resolution of a rancorous national controversy simply by dictating a settlement and telling the people to move on. Right. Whatever influence the court may have on public attitudes must stem from the strength of our opinions, not an attempt to exercise, quote unquote, raw judicial power, close quote. And I love that. People who have studied Roe versus Wade will recognize that the reference to raw judicial power at the end of that quote is quoting from Justice Byron White's very famous dissent in the original Roe versus Wade case of 1973. But I just was thinking about that, Chris, in the context of the media coverage, and we expected this. This is no surprise, but the media coverage, much of it hostile to what the court has done, is trying to make it look like what the court has done is some radical thing. It's overturned this federal constitutional right to abortion, when in reality, this opinion actually reflects a sense of judicial modesty, a sense of the real limits on judicial power, and saying that this court will not resolve this question. The people's elected representatives can. So we're definitely and we knew this would happen. We're in the full-scale battle to define what this decision really means. Just some thoughts on that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it is a modest decision. To suggest that this is radical, here's what's radical, Michael. What is radical is that there are 6 nations in the entire world that permit abortion through all 9 months of life, right? All 9 months in the womb. China, North Korea, the United States of America, and 3 others. How radical is that we're up there with these, communist dictatorships, if I may, that really have no respect for human rights or human dignity? That's radical. And so I think it is, as you described it, very modest to actually return it to the people's elected representatives. It was an exercise in raw judicial power. Even the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she recognized many sorts of, you might call them liberal or progressive law professors and judges, recognized that it was not a well-reasoned decision. It was entirely unnecessary. It was heavy-handed. It provoked just a greater distrust and disrespect for the judiciary. Yeah. And that's not to say that legislatures always get it right either. A majority, a 50% plus 1 vote in a legislature, they can do wrong things also. Yeah. But at the very least, there's a greater respect for the constitutional order and structure of dialogue of the people's representatives themselves, reasoning through difficult and contentious issues, and doing so in a way that is at its heart relational, which is, that's the great need of our country moving forward, is that we can, God willing, come Holy Spirit, help us to just bind up the wounds of our brothers and sisters. And we can be happy and pleased and grateful for this wonderful decision. But at the same time, that there are many people that are angry and will be angry about this decision. Yeah. They're our fellow citizens. Yeah. We got to stay in relationship, and that's how we do it in our great country. Is we, the legislature is the place in which we have these discussions.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Chris, that we know already that some legislatures have gotten this wrong with the very pro-abortion laws that we've seen pass in states like New York, for example. Laws passed in anticipation of this decision coming out today. But of course, the difference is that when elected officials make mistakes, and they do, we at least have a solution. There is a solution. And I'm reminded of that old cliche that says that a people gets no better government than they deserve. There's some truth to that. And so yes, elected officials can get this wrong, but at least in that case, we know how to fix it. But in the case of the judicial intervention, where the courts just rip that authority out of the hands of elected officials, what recourse do you have? You
Right.
simply have no recourse. And
That's right.
so this is this is a amazing breakthrough, to allow the democratic process to actually work on this issue. So, any other thoughts, Chris, just on the decision itself, and anything else that maybe stood out to you as you were skimming through 200 pages of this?
Oh golly, just if I can maybe just offer a personal reflection, and I know, golly, Michael, you've been working in the pro-life movement for decades, um, not just on the decision itself, but just maybe to just share my own experience of the day was a bit of course, yes, some happiness and some delight, but also a sense of solemnity and
Yeah.
of the magnitude. I mean, I had the sense of these big moments of like, will I remember where I was when I heard? I think I
Yeah.
will. I think I will
Yeah.
remember where I was when I heard, but also the sense of the task that is yet ahead.
Yeah.
I think in the bishop's statement that they put out today, they quoted Abraham Lincoln, with malice towards none, charity towards all. I really think that slavery was this great wound of our country, and we still experience racism in some ways. This wound is not entirely gone from us. I think we can say that abortion is also a great wound of our country, that we truly will need to beg the Lord to give us malice towards none and charity for all. So I'm, just kind of
Yeah.
wanting to move into the future with a sense of purpose to act rightly, but also to do so with love for all of my countrymen, even
Yeah.
those with whom I disagree.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And our listeners may want to take a look at the statement that the Catholic bishops of South Dakota released today in response to the decision. You can find that at sdcatholicconference.org. And if you just look under, I believe it's news or statements, you'll see that there. But I won't read the whole statement, but since Chris referenced it there, the bishops used those very words from Abraham Lincoln from the second inaugural address. I'll just read this last paragraph. They write, "As we work for justice, we must never lose sight of the spiritual nature of the battle before us. Let us pray earnestly for the conversion of those who fail to respect the dignity of human life and for those who have been wounded by abortion. Let us also pray that an authentic culture of life will be built that deploys creative solutions to help children, women, and men flourish as God has intended. May all our actions to protect life be carried out, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, with malice toward none, with charity for all." And like you said, Chris, I do think that's just absolutely the thought that we should have in our head as we move forward, is that we obviously have opponents on this issue. Some of them are bitter and some of them are angry. And what I keep reminding myself is that some of the most powerful pro-life advocates that we've had in this movement have been converts from the other side. I'm thinking of people like Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who actually founded the organization called NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League. It actually initially was the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, and then they changed their name later. But this doctor who performed thousands of abortions and founded this organization actually converted and became pro-life. Other names come to mind, like Abby Johnson, who was formerly Planned Parenthood clinic director, very prominent pro-life convert. And so as we move forward, when we look at our opponents on this issue, some of them using rancorous rhetoric, we have to discipline ourselves to say each and every one of those men and women is a potential convert, and let's be winsome in our approach to them, and winsome converts. So, and Chris, any closing thoughts before we wrap this up today?
just for myself, just begging for the Lord's grace. It's really a moment of prayer too. As you let us off, this happened on the solemnity of the most sacred heart of Jesus.
Yes.
This burning heart of love for the world. He desires to heal us. He can do it.
Yeah.
And I personally, I'm gonna beg him. Heal us, Lord.
Yeah. Well, we are obviously going to be talking about this decision some more. This isn't the last word that we'll have to say about Dobbs, because as we've talked about, the majority opinion is so rich in content, but then we also have these concurring opinions by Justice Thomas, Justice Kavanaugh, that we really want to unpack and look at in the days and weeks ahead. So I am sure this decision will be a frequent topic in our upcoming podcast, but we did want to get this one out today while the issue is so much in the forefront of everyone's minds. And so, just in closing, everybody pray hard. Jesus commanded us in the gospel to pray for our enemies. And, right now they are angry. And so we really need to be prayer warriors at this moment in lifting them up in our thoughts and prayers. And so pray hard. And until next time, live well.